Joyce Woodworth. Welcome to the Spirit of Winona. Today on this very beautiful fall day, we're in Houston, Minnesota at the Van Gundy Elk Farm. We're going to focus on the animals raised here today, the Rocky Mountain elk. We'll talk with the owner of the farm to learn about the elk themselves and what the benefits of the elk are to the consumer. The Van Gundy Elk Farm is about 20 miles from Winona. You take the Houston exit, which is Highway 76, off of Highway 90 and drive 10 miles, and the Van Gundy Elk Farm is on the left. The public is invited to take tours of the farm and stop by the antler shed to purchase many of the products related to elk. Surrounding the shed and homestead are 35 acres of fenced-in pasture where a herd of elk roam throughout the day. The fall is the rutting season for the elk when they begin their breeding ritual. This is the time you hear the bulls do their bugling to one another. You can hear one bugle in the distance and another answering. The bugling advertises his presence to the other bulls and to attract females. He also digs a hole with his antlers, where he leaves his scent. He then wallows in the hole to spread the scent to other parts of his body. He is then ready to attract, court, herd, and breed the females. We've come across Patty Van Gundy here in her yard with your beautiful elk. My goodness, he's gorgeous. Tell me about him. He's beautiful.
Well, this is Money Creek. He's 8 years old, and as you can see that he's really muddy. And another part of the breeding ritual is wallowing in the mud. And he's been doing that today. And he's also been tossing his antlers in the weeds. You see some weeds on the top of his head there. When elk strip their velvet, they're very white. And the way they color their antlers is by rubbing that off on the trees, the bark of the trees. And when they get that all rubbed off and dark and dirty from rubbing in dirt and whatnot, then they continue on and they thrash the tips of their antlers in the weeds. And that shines them up again. But when you see pictures of elk, a lot of times they're dark and the tips are white. That's how it gets that way.
Now, is that the full rack, or is that rack still going to grow more?
That rack is done growing, and that rack will stay just like that until next March, and then he'll drop that off on the ground when the new ones start to grow.
Okay, and then next year, will his rack actually be bigger than that?
It'll actually be bigger.
Patty, tell me about your elk operation here. How many elk do you have?
Well, we have about 65 elk right now, and we had 13 babies born this year. And the last few years we've been butchering off about as many as we raise, as we sell meat. Our meat sales have really increased over the last couple of years.
Patty and Larry Van Gundy were cattle farmers until 1993, when they decided they wanted to try something different and became the first elk breeders in this area. They began with 6 elk, and in their 11 years of elk farming have grown their herd to 65. In comparing cattle to elk, Patty feels that raising elk is much easier. Elk are smarter, generally healthier, and definitely hardier than cattle. She feels they know much more about what goes on the family farm than a dog would. However, they are not known to be very tame, and caution has to be observed when going near the animals. Each day, Patty and Larry spend as little as a half hour feeding the animals. Along with their grazing in the pasture land, they are given a supplement of oats and protein pills. In wintertime, they are also fed hay. The farm is split into 4 adjoining pastures. The young bulls enter the feeding area from their pasture, which is known as the bachelor pen. And the sounds we hear them make is like the teenage bugle. As he matures, the bugle will become higher pitched and louder, along with the deep throaty sound. This sound, known as the grunt, indicates the body size of the animal. It is meant to intimidate another bull from moving in on his females and at the same time attract more females.
You can raise elk on pasture that otherwise would be marginal for cattle. When people ask how much land do I need to raise elk, generally speaking, you can't say a set number of acres because pasture qualities vary and whatnot, but you can generally raise 3 elk to 1 cow.
Fencing is very important to the elk farm. It needs to be 8 foot high so that the elk cannot jump over it. Patty and Larry had to special order the fence from New Zealand. It is called a high tinsel tight lock fence, which is designed with a giving property that will bend easily when the animal runs or walks into it, keeping the animal from injuring himself. Elk breeding is definitely catching on in all parts of Minnesota. Farmland that used to house dairy cows and cattle are now taking on herds of elk. On a farm near Winona on top of Garvin Heights, former restaurant owner Jerry Beyer began his elk operation in 2003. The Van Gundys assisted Jerry Beyer in setting up his state-of-the-art elk breeding operation. We come across Jerry on a misty morning in fall as he brings the supplemental grain to his herd of 88 elk. Here the animals can roam within 35 acres of fenced-in pasture.
You're okay. I'm your buddy. Just don't be charging me. He never has, but I don't trust the bugger anyway. He says, you're in my territory. Huh? Hey, big boy. Over here behind me is the pastures that we have for the elk. We have to TB test them, check them every 2 years, bring them in. We got to worm them a couple times a year. This is where we bring them up this lane right here and bring them on up, bring them into the working facilities in here. Elk come on up through here, and you go on into this area over here. Here's a gate that I used to hold them off so they don't run me over. Bring it around like this. You gotta watch your back because they sometimes like to run over you. Move them on up in there, and then got someone inside. We got gates inside we'll be looking at where we close them off after they get in there so they can't get back down the lane. That corner is not square, it's rounded. And the reason it's rounded is elk don't like square corners. If they have an area like this, that elk will just keep right on coming right around here. And then we've got the gates here, which will, if I'm the elk, you want me to stay in there, you're on the outside and you close it up on him and he can't get back out. Split the elk up. If we have 15, 20 of them, we don't want all 15, 20 here. We want to put them in the pens, get them as comfortable as we can. Then the elk will come around here. This is where we weigh them, right here on this scale. There's a scale right here. we'd have this door shut. We'd also shut this door right here, gate would be shut. We weigh the animal, we want to know what the animals weigh, we want to know if they're gaining or losing. And we weigh the animal. From there, we open this gate up from the outside. For example, the heifers and cows that we would AI, which is artificial insemination, we would bring the cow into here, close this gate up here. Then I would bring this around, the cow then would be in there. I'd bring this around, pull this handle out like this, and get the animal to turn his head that way, and we can just close them off like that. And then the animal's in here, and then we can work on them. The veterinarian who gives the shots, open the doors up, gives them a little shave, put the needle in, put the alcohol in the needle, and give them their shots, whatever they're needed, and then close this back up. If that's all we're going to do, then we just release this, that door comes open, they go right out through the manual squeeze chute right back into the pasture. If we AI them, we would have this little door over here where they're artificially bred. This is where they would do their work right here. And this is the elk squeeze chute that we have, and it's hydraulic. We can go up and down with it. You've got to bring it at a certain height. When we get the animal in, we usually probably have it at about this high. And so what we have is up and down on both sides. We have a power neck for them. It goes in and out like this. So squeeze that down as much as you need to. Usually that's about where it is, and their head is up here. If we're going to worm them, we have a guy right here. In fact, I've got it down there, a little tube that we put it down into their mouth, give them the certain amount of cc's for how much they weigh, and release it. And we also, in the early spring, we delice them. We have a delicer. We put it on there from their head down to their back, and that keeps the lice and stuff and flies off of them. The other thing that we do in here is we velvet them. What that means is when they're in the spring, they'll get velvet on, they'll start growing, and they'll grow as much as, the big bulls will grow as much as an inch a day. So at a certain stage, we need to remove that if we're going to sell it. That's about the only income I'm getting off those animals right now is their velvet. The velvet market is a little weaker at this time. We hope it comes back. We bring them in here, we cut off the velvet. There's no pain there. Probably more stress on them getting them in the chute than there is cutting off the horns. If we decide not to velvet them, then we call it hard horn. We wait until they're fully developed. In the early part of September, in August, they'll rub all that velvet off. Here's a horn that we did cut off about a week or so ago. It looks like this, and you can see it's just like bone. You cut that off, and there's no hurt there at all. And they get out. And the way they go after we get them both cut off, or we give them their TB shots. The vet comes. We have to have all of our stuff. If you're going to be certified, you have to have your shots and everything every year. If you don't, you lose your certification, and you can't ship your animals out of state. We've got a good operation. It's easy on the animals, and it's easier on the handler also. So we're proud of our operation here, and we hope to someday make money at it.
Back at the Van Gundy Elk Farm in Houston, Patty Van Gundy takes us into her shop, the Elk Shed, to share with us the different ways you can make money as an elk breeder. Well, we're in Patty's shop now. This is a darling little shop, Patty. Tell me a little bit about your shop. What do you all sell here?
Well, we started with this shop in 1990. We built the building. I had antiques in here. And then as the elk industry grew and our herd grew, I got excited about selling some products that I could get from the elk. So the antiques kind of went out and the elk products came in, and we did some remodeling, and now we have products in here that are directly related to elk.
I understand that the antlers from the elk are very medicinal. Is that correct?
Oh, definitely. That's a big source of income for elk breeders. And the velvet antlers, when harvested at the proper time, are an excellent source of a dietary supplement.
Okay, now you have an example of some right here. Now this one's kind of a furry antler. When is this cut off of the elk itself?
This is a velvet antler harvested in about June. And generally the elk start growing a new antler, the males only, each year. And if you're going to use it as a dietary supplement, you count the days of growth. And it's usually between 65 and 70 days. And when you see that, you need to harvest the antler, and you keep it like a food product, and it gets further processed into a capsule form like I have here.
Okay. What happens if you just let this antler continue to grow until it's done growing?
If you let this antler continue to grow, the medicinal value goes away, because what happens is the antler continues to grow and develop those points. But if you let it grow past, say, like right here, this is the end, the fourth and the fifth tines that were starting to come, then what happens if it goes beyond that, this brow tine where it started to grow will start to calcify down and turn hard. And then the quality of the product deteriorates. People think that only the furry, velvety part is used, but actually that part isn't used at all. And this piece has been freeze-dried, so that's why we can hold it, and it's very light for us. And if this were to be processed further into capsules, someone would be at the freeze-drying place taking and scoring this with a knife and then taking a wedge and peeling this off. And here's a piece right here that was peeled off, and you can see that that was a tip. This is kept like a food product from the time it's harvested. It goes in our freezer and it stays there until it gets to the place where they freeze dry it. We take the chest freezer in our truck, and if it's going to be very long for a distance, we use a generator to keep it cold. It goes from our freezer to the freeze dryer. It's in a freeze dryer for approximately, depending on how long it takes to get the moisture out, maybe up to a couple months. And it goes from there on to a pharmaceutical place where they further test it and process it into the capsules. Those are some samples of this inner core where all the nutrients are. This is a sample of it sort of in chunks, bigger chunks, and ground a little further. It's just kind of showing how this breaks down and how it continues on its process to come back to me in the capsules.
Patty, let's talk about the benefits of this capsule.
That's the best part of it. Velvet antler is a dietary supplement. And being that it's a dietary supplement, it doesn't have to have an FDA approval. However, you can submit clinical studies and research to the FDA, and they will review that, and they will make a stance on it and give you a recommendation. What they have done, the FDA has reviewed all the research and clinical studies from around the world, and they have told us about 2 years ago that they substantiate that velvet antler does indeed restore joint structure and function. And so that was a big boost to our industry, because now we can officially make that claim. The people that I've been selling the capsules to for the last 5 or 6 years are seeing relief from their joint issues. People with knee pain, shoulder aches, tendinitis. I have one gentleman in town who was a mason, and his wrist was really bothering him from all that repetition work of laying brick, and he was going to have surgery, and he started taking the velvet antler capsules and no longer has the tendinitis in his wrist. Naturally in the elk antler is the glucosamine and the chondroitin. And those are the two things that does help with the arthritis symptoms. But it also helps to, when you alleviate those pains that your body has, it also helps you to feel better. And when you feel better and you're free of the pain, you have a better mood, and you just feel younger and more energy. Some of the properties in elk antler, besides the two I mentioned, are like there's 25 different of the essential amino acids. There is collagen and IGF-1 and 2 growth factors. Now, I was looking at marketing the product in Arizona. I have a sister that lives there. And they aren't so concerned about arthritis in Arizona. So I found that they're already selling the product from New Zealand, and they call it IGF. And it's basically promoted as an anti-aging product. And that's where the focus is in Arizona. Now here in Minnesota, we worry more about the aches and pains we have, but anti-aging is definitely a very important role in the velvet antler. I like to keep the shop with as many things as I can that are handmade, and so I'm always looking for things that people make locally.
Okay, well, let's go see what else you have.
Okay.
Well, how about this dress? Is this actually from an elk hide?
Actually, this is a deer hide.
Okay.
And there isn't a lot of difference except the size.
You can use elk hides, can't you?
Yes. The elk hide is much heavier. The person that made the dress for me thought that it would get just too warm for me wearing it and a little too heavy.
Okay, what's the connection to the elk with this dress?
Well, I did some research and I found that many years ago when the Indians went hunting for food for their tribes, they went elk hunting and buffalo hunting, and the Indians knew that elk had two ivory teeth. Their two upper teeth and their ivory. The rest of their teeth are very normal like any other animal. And the Indians, when they hunted the elk then, would take those two ivory teeth, bring them back to their wives, and they would sew them on their ceremonial dress. And it was a big deal. It was a sign of prestige and honor that they had a good hunter. So I thought it would be fun to do the same thing here, and when we do tours, I sometimes wear it. And as we started harvesting our elk, we saved the ivory teeth, and that's what you see sewn on the dress there and on the purse. You can see on the purse here the difference in the teeth size, and that's because this is a bigger bull, and their size, as we talked about, is larger. And these teeth are from a cow then. And as they age, they get kind of a nice ring, a brown ring to them, and it makes them really pretty.
Well, Patty, let's talk about the other things that you can make with the elk antler. Now, for instance, this one here is absolutely gigantic. Holy cow, did that one just shed by itself, or did you cut that one off?
No, this is a shed antler.
Wow, look at that.
And maybe if I can grab it from you, I'll turn it around so we can see.
That must weigh probably 20 pounds.
This is about 20 pounds, and you can see that that antler just naturally fell off the top of the elk's head. We've got another one over here, if we can set that one down. And that would be this one. And that's a cut end.
Okay.
We cut the antler off probably about, the end of August, before we get into the full rut. And the reason we did that is because they're so hard on things throughout the winter. They're very dangerous to each other, and you can see the tip of that point, pretty sharp.
So that's why you would cut it off, so they don't harm one another.
So they don't harm one another. They're also hard on the buildings, rubbing and the fences and things like that. We also have antlers that are available for people to craft. If they wanted to come in and purchase an antler, they could use it in making knife handles, legs, bases for tables. People are doing a lot of things. This is a button, and when I talked about
This is actually a button. You mean a button for your coat?
Actually, the antler that we looked at that was the shed end. This was the part that we saw on the end of it, and this is where it got cut off on the other one. So this would be on the animal's head, and if we cut the antler, that's what he'd be wearing all winter, like this. And then in the spring, when the new one starts to grow, this one gets cast off.
Okay.
And then I go out in the pasture and pick them up. And people who like to craft will take this and make like a belt buckle. Or here I have a sample of a bolo tie that's been carved.
It's beautiful.
As the animal grows and the antlers get bigger, we can see the difference in the sizes. So that goes right along with the age.
How old do you figure this elk was?
This bull was 5.
Now, I know you sell something very special in your shop besides all your wonderful gifts, your wonderful medicinal capsules, but you also sell elk meat, right?
Right.
Now, do you butcher it right here on the farm?
No, we actually take our animals live to Winona, to Letterbers, and they process our animals for us, and then we bring it back and we sell it as packaged meat from the farm. If you look in the freezer behind you, we keep all of our meat right there if you'd like to pull some selections out.
Ooh, it looks like a nice roast.
We try to stock, something for everyone. We keep roast on hand, ground, steaks, jerky. Elk meat is so lean and low in fat, but high in protein, that it makes a really good, heart-healthy source of food for people. Red meat, it's actually the one of the leanest red meats available to people. In terms of fat, on a 3-ounce cooked portion, elk is 1.9 grams of fat versus beef, which is 9.3.
Well, does it taste gamey at all, like deer meat does?
Well, I was kind of worried about that myself when we first started raising elk, because I grew to not be so fond of venison. You know, venison, a lot of people really like venison, but you do have that smell a lot of times in cooking it. It's a kind of a sweeter meat, and so therefore everybody seems to really like it. There is no smell in cooking, and I think it's so nice to use it for making my hot dishes, my meatloaf, all those kind of things, because there's no fat to drain. And when we have people come in the shop, I always send them out with a brochure on elk meat. A lot of times it's this book called Cooking with Elk, and it gives some tips on how to cook with elk, reminders on how lean it is. And it also has several recipes. And generally speaking, you can use all of your other recipes that you use beef and just substitute the elk meat in, just keeping in mind the cooking temperatures and the time for that. Our jerky, when you see on the label, it says keep refrigerated. And the reason is that it doesn't have all those preservatives in it that other jerkies might have. And so we feel that it's a lot healthier for you. And therefore, people keep it in their refrigerator or frozen. And I'll give you a taste of that.
Okay, I'll look forward to that.
All right.
Patty, thank you so much for sharing everything. Boy, we've learned so much about elk today, and I've enjoyed shopping around in your shop and learning about what you do with the antlers. It's been a terrific experience for all of us.
Well, I'd like to thank you for coming and visiting us today, because part of the enjoyment for me in raising elk is all the people I meet. I meet some wonderful people, and visiting with them and telling them about the elk, and just letting more people be aware of another product that's out there and another venture. Perhaps people who visit us will be interested and want to raise elk themselves, and I'd be glad to help anybody get started with some information and go from there.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Patty.
Oh, you're welcome. Thanks.
And thank you for joining me today. Please join me again next week. Till then, enjoy the Spirit of Winona.